Hey guys, welcome back to the Lot Pod, the #1 mental health podcast in the world for the second time in person. Today we'll be focusing on a little bit different of a topic, the mental game of sports and pressure within sports. And we have our special guest, Sydney Gaw, girls sports commissioner of University High School, as well as an athlete in 4 varsity sports, including wrestling, cross country, soccer, and lacrosse. Sydney, thanks so much for joining the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into talking about sports and pressure, technically I am talking about sports, but let's talk about why you chose to do sports. So you do 4 different sports, which is crazy to me, but why did you choose to go into so many sports?
So I think growing up, I always played soccer. That was the very first sport that my parents ever forced me to play. And, over time, I did come to love the sport. I do love soccer, and it holds a very dear place in my heart as the first time where I actually got to practice in a team environment, get to know the teams and the sports that I played.
You're good.
We'll cut it out, don't worry.
Okay, yeah. I really loved soccer, just getting to know the people, the teams, the coaches, and the sport itself was just really fun growing up. And I think as I grew up and even starting in high school, I really turned to sports as a way of, just mixing up the day after so many classes. Sports provided me the opportunity to really relax, to work on something that wasn't just straight up academics, and I developed so many new relationships in all of the teams that I was playing with, and I think that experience really motivated me to keep up with sports.
That's amazing. Okay, question for me as your, keep in mind, fellow lacrosse teammate here. What's your favorite sport out of the 4 you do?
Well, I have to say, I have loved my time on the lacrosse team. I joined lacrosse actually in freshman year. That was, I think, the 3rd sport I ever tried in my life. And it was just an eye-opening experience. I came from soccer, which is, in California, a very competitive sport. And, as I got older, I really realized that the team environment, and as much as I loved the people that I played with, and I love the coaches, and I love the sport, the community can be pretty toxic, and coming into lacrosse, it was a totally new experience. I didn't have to feel a need to prove myself, and all of us were learning in freshman year, and I think we really bonded as a team, and no matter what school I played lacrosse at, I really just felt welcomed by the teams and by the coaches, and that's been one of the best experiences of high school so far, and I absolutely love.
That's so sweet,
our
guys.
lacrosse
Totally
team.
biased, but it's okay.
So, pivoting a little bit into another personal question. You have been playing 4 sports. What kind of drew you into deciding to run for girls sports commissioner and trying to take over kind of running the sports community at uni since you're so involved with it?
Yeah, so part of it was definitely playing all of these sports. I had a good idea of the athletic community at our school, and I was familiar with a lot of the athletes themselves, and playing multiple sports myself, I kind of knew the drill with athletics, how sports worked, how, all of our games and our scheduling worked, and I think I really wanted to bring that insight into the role of sports commissioner. But the other reason that I was really motivated is because I think growing up, and this is going to sound cheesy, but growing up, I definitely wished I had more role models who looked like me and were in the sports community. I mean, obviously, I'm only like 5 feet tall, and as most people know, I'm
I thought you were like
vertically
4'2",
challenged. Yeah, so you know what? It's in the sports community, you don't see as many body types and as many ethnicities either represented in women's sports. And I think growing up, I love the professional soccer community. I love them, and I was so inspired by them, but I did never see anyone like me who I could relate to, who shared my upbringing in sports, and who also, could represent just another Asian girl. And in our community, that was a really big part of my identity. So part of coming to girls sports commissioner at uni was wanting to be able to represent as many people as possible. And with so many athletes, I feel like I wanted to be able to speak to each of them, to represent as many sports as possible on a personal level, and to really bring a new aspect to it, which is that as diverse as our city is, there has not been as much representation, I think, in student leadership that I really felt connected to just in all the years that I've been going to school. And I think that was part of a big decision for me.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, you dove into so many important things and so many things that we want to talk about. But I kind of want to lean back to the second point you made, like in the second question we asked you, and how you talked about the different environments you were placed in through the different sports you played. You talked about how the lacrosse environment was a lot different than soccer in the way that it was more supportive. So just diving into that, how do you think the environment has affected you in the sense that, like, maybe you had some coaches that put too much pressure on you, maybe you had some teammates that were constantly competing and things of that sort. So how did that affect you, and more specifically, your mental health?
Yeah, so, before coming to high school, I think a lot like many of our other athletes who I did compete in club teams prior to coming to high school, and I think there was a lot of pressure just within the community to always be on top of everything, to be the best in your sport, and that was an immense pressure, especially coming into high school where I was competing with multiple other amazing athletes who had gone through that same pressure, and we all felt like we had to be better than each other. And I think that as much as that isn't talked about, it's definitely a very real pressure when you're competing in multiple tryouts, and not just in club but also going into high school. I feel like we do all carry this kind of perception of each other when we're like, oh, this person played club on this team and they're like nationally ranked, and having to compete against people who were amazing athletes but also deal with that pressure of being a competitor was really hard. So, and I find that that's very common in a lot of sports like soccer, where a great portion of people in the country grow up playing this sport. It's one of the most watched sports in the world, and I think with that pressure, the professional community really kind of sets this ideal for athletes to try to get to that top-notch level. And I think I definitely felt a lot of that pressure growing up and going into high school, which is what really pushed me to try new sports when I wasn't really feeling the need or the desire to keep putting up with this pressure. And it wasn't just from teammates, it was also from coaches and from parents. And I think that even more than my own parents and my own coaches, you'll see and meet other coaches and other parents who are like, well, we want our athlete to be performing on the best team with the best people. And you'll hear pressure from them too. It's very hard to deal with the whole community as a whole, because you have to deal with pressure from so many different groups, and that really was a difficult part of being in a sport.
Yeah, so as an elite top athlete as myself on the uni high team, I transformed the tennis team pretty much, in my opinion. Well, I left such an impact that the team kind of took in my energy. How do you think you deal with kind of that pressure, and what outlets do you feel kind of when you have to deal with such immense pressure from not only coaches but other parents? And being part of so many sports can lead to a lot of pressure. So how do you kind of deal with that as an outlet?
You know what? Sports has always been not only a kind of an outlet for me to just be myself and to kind of take a break from academic pressures, but it was also a creative outlet for me to express my athletic side, not only in training, but also in the skill sets that we learned and the bonds that we created with our teammates. And for me, I think it's kind of funny, actually. When I felt pressured in soccer, my initial response to that was to join like 4 other sports. And my logic with that was, when I was part of multiple sports, I didn't have to spend as much time with one sport, and that really alleviated the pressure I would face or expect from a single sport. And so I did do wrestling and lacrosse and cross country, and each sport was kind of a break from all the other sports. And I really used that to allow myself to make new friends, to think about other things, and to not worry about the pressures I was facing from a certain coach or certain teammates. And, throughout high school, I think I found that it's really healthy to take a step back sometimes from the sports that you're involved in. And as well, it's the same for academics. But if you take a break from something for a short amount of time, it's a good space to take a break and recoup. And I think I found that really helpful in maintaining my mental health, because there was so much pressure from all these different sports that when I kind of switched around, I was able to take a break and think about other things.
So I think what she's trying to recommend is that it's okay to have commitment issues with sports. Not your friendships or relationships, but with sports, it's okay. It helps.
100%.
Okay. Special advice from Sydney. But as you were mentioning, that you did use other sports to kind of like deal with the stress, deal with the pain. Hopefully not too much pain. But let's just say that you said it was an outlet. Focusing on that, I think a lot of us need our outlets. Like, when I play lacrosse, and honestly, like today when I went out on the field, I was not really having it. Like, today was kind of an off day, so I like really used passing and catching and like spending time with my teammates as like my kind of outlet. So I feel like when it comes to academics, in a lot of our other past podcast episodes, even the last episode where it was like Harvard versus homeless, like your parents, your pressure, your school pressure, and things of that sort, all that pressure, you need an outlet. And I feel like, but how do you deal with both the pressures together? Because sometimes you'll have the athletic pressure that when you go on that field, you need to perform, you need to win, otherwise you won't qualify to CIF. I mean, I'm using that as last year's example, that's all I remember. And at the same time, you have your AP exams and you're like constantly studying because you're like, if I don't get a 5, oh God. So how do you deal with that, like, athlete scholar life and just deal with that pressure?
You know what? I always try to stay true to, and I've told other people this too, just do what you love. And I'm very happy to say that that is something I've stuck with throughout high school. I've only ever committed to extracurriculars and academics that I really, truly enjoy. And if you were to look at my transcripts, you'll see I take classes that I was genuinely interested in and that I really love the content. And for me, that was a way to allow myself to have fun in school and to actually enjoy the subjects that I was studying. So it seemed less like an external pressure and more like I want to make myself proud and I want to do this well because I love it. And with sports, it was the same. I really did enjoy all of the sports that I play, and I love the teams too. As much as there was pressure, I think that I really did love each sport. And it is hard to, kind of develop that relationship with sport and with the people who are part of that community. But over time, I really found that I love soccer, I love lacrosse, I love wrestling, and I love cross country. And when you love something, you just take the time to enjoy it. And for me, that meant, showing up to practices, hanging out with my teammates after games and matches. And that allowed me to not feel the external pressure of, parents and coaches and this kind of idea that you had to be extremely good at your sport. More than wanting to be at the top of my sport, I just wanted to have fun. And I think through high school, I really stuck true to that.
I should have taken your advice before I took AP Physics. Anyway, weren't you?
AP Physics, great class. I stand by it. So, as you were talking, about work-life balance and like sport balance, how do you think you've used kind of your idea of having fun in order to implement a good balance, but also challenging yourself kind of throughout your high school career?
Yeah, so I will say a lot of athletes are always working towards the next goal. And for me, I do try to have as many goals as possible, whether they're in reach or they're more long-term goals. And I think striving to work for something is an important part of staying motivated as an athlete and as a student, because having multiple outlets where you can be proud of the work you're doing is essential, I think, to staying on task and to staying committed throughout the year, because playing so many sports, it does get draining towards the end of the seasons. And I did struggle for a while with balancing, extracurriculars with sports, with academics. And for the most part, I did always try to challenge myself, but the equally important part is knowing your limits, because as much as I loved what I was learning and I loved all of the sports and extracurriculars I was a part of, I knew my limits and I knew how much of a workload I could take on a certain day or a given week. And knowing my limits allowed me to plan ahead and to strategize on how I wanted to approach my goals. It was essential in the process of, balancing all these different extracurriculars and activities. And I don't think I would have been able to do it all if I didn't truly enjoy it and if I didn't accept part of the challenge. For sports, that really has been holding myself to a high standard of training and of wanting to be better, but also accepting that I don't have to be the number one player on the team. I don't have to be a D1 college athlete. I can succeed on a team if I meet my own goals. And that was an important realization that helped me go throughout all of the sports that I was doing.
That's amazing. I'm glad that you've been very, honestly, that's really inspiring, because I'm definitely not as, planned out, know what's happening kind of thing, but I'm very glad to get the advice.
It's a great learning process.
We got Andrew saying slay on camera. Anyway, so now I want to ask you a couple more questions that kind of have to do with, a little more personal, but have to do with, the negative aspects of how you've dealt with sports. The first question that I have has to do with, sometimes we deal with a lot of stress in life and inevitable anger. Everyone gets angry sometimes. And as you mentioned, lacrosse or soccer, those are your outlets. Have you ever, I'm saying this because personally I've totally done it. Sometimes when I'm standing in goal and I've had a really bad day, just, picture that ball as, someone that I'm mad at and be like, you can't come near me. I don't know. That was lacrosse advice I got. But anyway, have you ever seen yourself, use the sport, but, use that to get rid of your anger, or use that to get rid of, frustration from something, and just, shown it in your game?
Always. I think sports, for me, was one of the best anger outlets ever, and I totally recommend this to anyone who, any sport, find what you love, but for me, I definitely used sports as an outlet for my stress and for any building anger that I was, experiencing at the time. And a lot of that was fueled by probably my brother. No. He never hears this, but yeah, it was definitely hard.
Shout out to Dee's brother.
Yes, we have a mixed relationship, but
he's not a top G.
Totally okay, right?
I think, a lot of, there's always going to be disputes within your family, and
for sure,
just with, even if it's in your friend group as well, or with other teammates on other teams. I think that I would often use sports.
Woodbridge.
Whoa.
Okay. Throwing shade at the Lodge president's former high school.
Sorry, Jack.
Yeah, rivalries too. I think whatever keeps you motivated is a big part of sports. And as much as I would like to say that we are all very civil, that's not always the case. And for me, obviously, I play a lot of high aggression sports, just them being very high contact and reliant on, getting worked up against your opponent. I think that was a good stress reliever for me, because it was the opportunity to not really worry about how I was acting in terms of holding back. I didn't have to hold back when I was working with my teammates and with my opponents. And this wasn't in a negative way. This was in a very constructive way, I think, because all of us were there in this common goal to kind of relax, to get to know each other, and to also compete in our sport. And a big part of competing is, kind of chaotic, actually. You have to convince yourself that you're obviously ready to play a sport. And I think that that's not the most, I want to say, the healthiest way for a lot of people.
That's
but
true.
you have to see sports in a healthy way. And for me, that was a healthy outlet for my stress because obviously with field roles, you can get out a lot of your aggression. You're also tiring yourself out.
But like yellow cards.
I did get a few of those. Yeah,
it's okay, but she's a very valuable player to our team.
You know, yeah, you think that me, like, 5-foot little Asian girl, like, how much, like, anger and aggression could I possibly have? It's a lot, yeah. And you know what? People, you look back on my footage, you'll see me scrambling across the field. I was an aggressive player.
She was
I stand by, like,
fast.
Yeah, you know,
Anyway.
I stand by just putting your all into a sport. And I think that this outlet allowed me to pour my energy into something that was very physical and very physically demanding. And that kind of took away the energy that would go to something, you know, internally destructive, and instead funneled that into something where I was working with others and, you know, working with my team to, you know, strengthen ourselves and to get better at our sport.
Okay.
He's laughing.
That look. We gotta
anyway.
cut this part. We gotta cut this part.
You don't have to
Anyway.
cut-
Okay.
It could be in the BTA.
Anyway.
Okay. As a
Funny,
person, you know, who's known kind of for their Zen attitude as well as their speed and agility, I kind of had a question though.
I don't think he's listened to the rest of the episode. Anyway.
As someone who kind of possesses all of those qualities, well, not really, but as someone who likes to think they possess those qualities, have you ever kind of had an experience where you've let your anger or let kind of that pressure get to you and you've kind of expressed it in a negative light?
You know, there are some times where I think the pressure did get to me, you know, during games. I would definitely feel like I was letting my team down if I wasn't doing everything in my power to stop an opponent or to, you know, stop the opposing team from scoring. And I think that the pressure I faced from that was really something that I held myself to because my teammates they're amazing and nicest people out there, yes. But I really wanted to help them in the best way that I could as a fellow teammate. And I think that pressure can bring out the worst in people. I will admit that sports is hard to regulate because 1 minute you may be on like a sports high where everyone's cheering, you feel like the weight of the game is on your shoulders. And in times like those, the pressure is immense. It is really easy to buckle under all of those expectations, under the sentiment that, you know, you're the one has to carry your team in that moment. And I think for me, that was difficult because sometimes it's very hard to control your emotions. And I'm a very emotional player. I really excel off of my emotions because they propel me forward in the game. And, you know, there are times where that can be detrimental because you can make, you know, quick judgments that aren't the best. You can do irrational things during a game, like, you know, going in for, like, literally a tackle. And it's crazy to think about it. But, you know what, sports, when we think of, you know, like, the psychology behind it, sports is really a place where a lot of people get out their anger and their stress, and people like to think of sports as a way to get out your negative emotions. And to some extent that is true. I would say I funnel a lot of that negativity into sports, but it really was important for me to kind of adapt and to learn what my breaking point was, to kind of stop in the moment and to take a deep breath and to really think about my next moves and how I really wanted to help my team. That was definitely a game changer and something you really have to think about as an athlete.
Wow. Well, to make sure this is like not just you sharing, I guess I can share. Because I feel like what you're talking about is really true. Many times we try to funnel our anger, but sometimes the pressure that's there through your coaches or your teammates is pretty high. Like, for example, last year, I think you remember our Northwood game, the one that was away. So, for context, we have pretty, like, high standards for our team, and since we were, like, returning champions and this and that, it's like, oh, like, we're expected to do good. So I remember that game, I didn't expect to play the entire game, but then I was put in within the first 5 minutes, and it was a pretty good game for me, but it came down to that last shot on me that I let by me. And I was so mad at myself. And even though, like, my coaches were like, oh, yeah, like, the entire team, went through everyone before it came to you as goalie. I feel like sitting there, because I was, like, the last line of defense, and it was also, like, a testing game, because it was, like, I didn't get to play as much this semester, so it's, like, when that pressure is put on you, like, your entire team is, like, this is, like, if you lose this game, then it's, like, they're, like, oh, like, you needed to step up, and you didn't. So I feel like a lot of things of that sort, like, gets to you, and then you end up, like, having a negative impact, like, through the pressure, and then that comes out in many negative ways. Like, the next day in practice, I was kind of like, I don't want to be here.
It is that way. I think for athletes, it's so easy to beat yourself up for something that was not just your fault. It was, the whole game as a whole could be different, and I think as athletes, it's a really hard thing to judge and to feel bad about too.
Yeah, that's true. So, like, I don't know, that was, like, one of my main examples. And I feel like we talked about how, like, the pressure's good sometimes. It helps you, like, be an outlet. And then, like, that, like, a tiny bit of pressure sometimes can be, like, pushing you to be better, to be stronger, like, practice more. So I think it's a mix of, like, good and bad. I know, Arjun, you also played sports,
Oh, absolutely. So I was on the tennis team last year.
No, you weren't. No, you weren't.
I was not on the tennis team last year, unfortunately, but I was on it the year before, and that was a very interesting experience because, well, to be honest, I have not had a lot of experience being on teams. I used to play soccer, actually, a little known fact.
No way.
Yeah, I used to be on AYSO Lightning Sharks for about 4 years. And I actually stopped playing. I was it was creating kind of a monster, It kind of created, like, all the pressure and stuff kind of led me to become, quite aggressive during games. And, it just was not a good thing for me. But when I found tennis, it became kind of a new outlet because tennis is not a team sport. So I didn't feel really as much pressure because it was me performing against myself, I guess, and trying to push myself to be better rather than feeling like if I didn't perform in this game, the whole team would be upset at me and I would have to kind of let it out on the field. And I think that was a very formative experience, kind of finding the right fit for a sport. So what kind of made you choose the sports that you did? Because there's so many options. You're very athletic, you're a great runner. You have, great speed, great agility, things like that. All kind of traits that make great athletes. What made you choose to pursue not only lacrosse and soccer, but wrestling?
Yeah, because that was the most recent one you chose. I remember when I found out you were doing wrestling. I found out in the weight room, and we were just like, "Where's Sydney?" And he goes, "Oh, she wrestles now." And we all went, "Huh? Since when?" So,
wrestling is actually, I would say, one of the least aggressive sports out of the ones I played. And part of that's because...
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
that is going to be the intro right there. That's the intro clip.
Okay.
Keep going. We're going to cut.
So wrestling was actually one of the least aggressive sports, I think. And part of that's just because within the community, I think, as opposed to playing lacrosse or soccer, those very high-level athletic and competitive sports, in wrestling, it's more of a self-improvement kind of competition. And
Like tennis.
Yeah, 100%. People don't realize wrestling is very individual. It's you against yourself, against your opponent. And more than anything, it's a mental battle because you have to deal with mostly your own internal pressure. And I think within the sport, I really felt like I wanted to get better because come competition day, I'm the only one who's competing. It's just me. It's up to me. I can't wait to be saved by another teammate. And in the match, you really realize that it's one-on-one. It's you against your opponent. And definitely there's a mental aspect to that because you have to think about what your coaches are going to say after the match. You're thinking what all the spectators and what your teammates are thinking. And the scary thing is in that moment, you don't know for sure what they're thinking. And I think in a lot of other sports, it's easy to communicate what you want, what you're trying to do. But in wrestling, I really had to, follow my intuition, to follow my instinct.
T, Time out.
Slight boundaries.
So, we were talking about the one-on-one. We got a little side comment from Andrew talking about how it's really brutal. Because of all the pressure. I honestly haven't felt that since 8th grade. Because I swam for most of my life.
Oh.
And then all of a sudden in 8th grade, I was like, you know what? I'm done. We're doing lacrosse.
I used to swim too.
Really? Yeah.
JCC Red.
Huh.
You remember the team?
I have no idea what that is.
I swam for the Jewish Community Center Red team. Yes, I remember that distinctly.
I swam for the Dublin Green Gators, which was our city team.
Wow.
Dublin,
California, not Ireland.
Ireland. It's a pretty nice place.
I wish. I want to go there.
My grandma lives there.
No, he doesn't.
No, she actually no, my girl, my aunt.
No
she
way.
lives in Moggerfeld, Northern Ireland. You can look this place up.
Okay, I will. Anyway, so you were talking about how it's pretty brutal to be like thinking about, oh, I don't know what my coach is thinking. But when you like put that into perspective, when you compare it to like, oh, working with a team and then having the pressure of your teammates being like, dude, you just didn't pick up that ground ball. What are you doing? So which one do you think is like worse if you had to choose, or if you had to compare them, which is a hard thing to choose, but you want to show the camera?
I'm just showing us the
Show
city
the camera,
on
buddy.
the camera.
Guys, that's Ireland
facts.
place.
That's
yep.
facts.
Anyway, now you can answer the question, Sydney.
Oh, okay. So that's a tough question.
Thank you. I
They're
appreciate
very
it.
separate experiences, but I think both sports have a lot of intense personal pressure where you're kind of doubting yourself and you have to work through that struggle. But I will say working with a team is probably one of the most formative experiences, I think, for any athlete, because you have to learn not only to fulfill your own needs on the team, but also to help all of your teammates fulfill their needs. And I think that symbiosis is kind of the key to playing a team sport where you have to work with others. And as much as wrestling was intense and physically draining and mentally draining as well, it doesn't have the same level of external pressure where you feel like you're letting down your teammates in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
In the wrestling match, of course I'm going to doubt myself and feel like I'm letting down my coaches or my fellow wrestlers, but it's not to the same level as playing on like lacrosse or soccer and really having this moment during the game where you're not sure if you're doing all that you can do to help your team, and that is really scary and one of the hardest pressures of being an athlete on a team sport.
Yeah.
I got a question. Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Of
go
course.
crazy.
You talked about personal pressure, right? So what about like choking? Like, do you ever like? Sorry, am I not supposed choke?
No,
That's a
no,
term.
that's fine,
no?
that's fine,
Yeah.
that's a term.
Okay, so it's like, do you ever
You know what
lose
I mean.
sleep before like competitions?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think my first club lacrosse tournament, so I played for SoCal Express in California. Yeah.
Ooh.
I remember that one.
Yeah.
SoCal Express.
Buddy, do you know what that is?
No idea
Whoa.
what they just said.
SoCal Express. Of course I know that one. That one's they play the Wolves. There's a wolf, right? There's a wolf.
There's always an eagle.
No, there's Mad Dogs.
There we go.
Girl!
LAX Mad Dogs. Ben Wiedemann plays
They're
Ben.
not. Anyway.
Yeah, okay, so it was first real tournament of the season, and I was so hyped for this game. I mean, part of it might have been like the carb loading night we had right before this tournament.
That's smart,
Maybe it
guys.
was
Do
that.
Concussion
Maybe it
loading?
was that, yeah. But I did not sleep a wink. It was in Palm Springs. We had a 5 a.m. arrival time at the field, and we drove to the hotel, and we arrived. I was with my dad at the time, and we arrived at the hotel at like 5 p.m. The night before the big game, and that night I went out to dinner with my teammates, and then we all went back to our respective hotels to rest. And I kid you not, I laid in bed, I stared at the ceiling for like 6 hours before I had to get up and get my gear together, and that alone was just so nerve-wracking because as an athlete, I think one of the biggest things we take into consideration is getting rest and being properly fueled before a game. And to stay awake all night was
How was
very
the game?
jarring. It was okay. So the game afterwards, it was not the most memorable game, and I think that's a good.
Okay, that's good. That means
That's
you
a good
did
lesson.
Yeah, I think I really like looking back on that because I don't remember much, and the good thing about that is it means that nothing went incredibly wrong. But it was our first game, so
How do you deal with
I just got his hand out like he's trying to.
Okay. So the reason I said it was a good point was because we put so much kind of we put so many value judgments on kind of the first of things, right? This is the first game. This is going to decide the season. But in the end, we don't remember. We don't remember a lot because when the AP tests were coming out, right, I decided I'm going to go to bed at 10 and wake up, at 6 or something and look at the scores. I could not sleep. Every time I would sleep, I would have some nightmare that when I opened up the score report, I got 2s and 1s.
Oh God!
And then I like died of stress. I would have this like recurring dream for 3 nights in a row. So I was so sleep deprived. And then when I opened up the AP scores and was pleasantly surprised, it kind of wore off so quickly. Oh, okay, I did well, but it's like it kind of shows how we internalize all the stress and pressure, and then it doesn't kind of come to fruition or doesn't have the impact we think it does. And even for me, like the first match on the tennis team before the pandemic hit was against Harvard Westlake in February. I remember that match distinctly because it was February 18th, 2020, and I did not play that match, but I do remember.
Why are you so
Disclaimer!
nervous, like for your teammates, like?
We were very kind of overconfident in that match, right? We thought we're gonna kill these guys. We're the best, right?
Oh, you talking about the CIF finals?
Yes, bro. Do you remember that?
The one that we lost.
Yes. There's a story. There's a moral of the
Didn't
story.
you lose it and then win last year and then won CIF last year?
We did win CLF last year, but
Without Arjun, actually. Yeah.
without me.
I'm
But
just kidding.
without me.
I'm just kidding.
Dang.
Unfortunately, I might have ruined the team, but I remember how nervous I was, and then when we did lose, it hurt. You know what I mean? Even though I didn't play, it kind of hurt. It lasted with me. But at the same time, I don't think the team would have won without that loss this year in a weird way because it kind of let us take into a lot of things we did in perspective and change a lot of the ways we did. And I learned that we beat Harvard West like 15-3 in the first round. We beat them quite badly. So there's value in losing, I think, also. And what's kind of your perspective on that? Losing sometimes, not winning on everything.
Oh, 100% losing is essential to growing as an athlete, and I think that the best athletes, whatever sport, have lost games and have lost multiple matches, and I think this applies to every athlete out there. You can't get to the top spot without having experienced loss and without having had to overcome that challenge. And me personally, I've definitely lost a lot of games. I lost a lot of wrestling matches, and with a lot of my teams, we definitely experienced a lot of losses as well as wins. But before we could get to those wins, we had to work through our losses, which showed us essentially what we needed to improve on, how we could work better as a team. And I just don't think you can play at the top level without having had a loss or had a challenge to overcome.
Yeah, I was trying to think of like a thing that rhymes with motivation to make like a quick little like summary of what you said. I don't know. I do that a lot, but my brain's blanking.
Creation. Motivation is creation, passion, and devotion.
Oh, damn.
Wow. Really poetic, but it has nothing to do with what we were talking about. But as I was saying, so what you said about how like losing is really valuable, and because it provides motivation, it provides you an ability to do better. I've seen this a lot personally in our games, where sometimes where we're like, oh, like we're about to lose this game, but the next game we're like, we have to work twice as harder, let's put in more effort. Though we didn't have as great of a win like we did with Harvard Westlake, but when we played Modern Day for a second time this year, the motivation of like, oh, losing so much like last year, we were like, hey, we have to do better this year. So, but talking about, like, personally, like, individually when you deal with a loss, like, I guess that in my case, that's, like, having a really bad save percentage, like a 2% save. I feel like I have had a really bad save percentage one game, and I feel like that was, like, me choking. And just, like, basically using that to motivate me the next game. But have you, like, had a really negative, like, impact of, like, doing bad in a game and, like, just being really frustrated? Because you seem to be pretty, like, healthy on, like, using that in motivation. But how is that, like, that feeling that, oh, like, damn, like, I just wish I did better, like, that kind of feeling?
Definitely when I was playing club soccer, I remember there was this one game. It was all the way in Norco, and we had driven a very long time to get there, and I felt terrible after the game because we had lost and because I felt like I had done probably my personal worst in that game. And coming out of it, I was definitely dazed. I was very shocked by my poor performance because I had practiced with this team for almost a year by that time, and because I felt confident going into it, and not overconfident, but just confident in my ability to communicate and even just in my skills, which I had practiced for years. And to come out of that game, not only with a team loss, but with a personal loss, was definitely hard to take because I was with my parents. You know, all of us were very tired after such a long drive, and, you know, expecting to take that much of a long drive back. And I remember sitting in the car and I was just silent. I was, like, on the verge of tears because I felt like a lot of the goals that were scored were preventable, but that I had done a poor job, you know, trying to stop those goals against us. And that really also showed me kind of the level of pressure that I was facing because when you're in your sport and when you're in the moment, you don't realize how much pressure you're actually experiencing to do your best. And once I was past that point in the game, I finally realized, and it all hit me, and I was like, that was a terrible game. I performed terribly. And, you know, obviously I probably did cry about that, but the day after I woke up and I was like, you know, I feel so much better. I sucked at that last game, and from that, I can now move forward. I don't have to fear that I'm going to do terrible at my next game because it can only get better from there.
Yeah.
And thankfully it did.
Okay, good.
Thankfully, yes. It's just one of those times where you feel terrible in the moment, but you really learn to work on improving and to ensuring that, like, you're always going to improve and do better.
Well, I want to end this on, like, kind of like a more positive note. Kind of talking about, I'm going to go down the line. So I'm going to start with Arjun, actually. Arjun, what's your favorite memory or experience or thing that a sport has given you? Because you've also
My favorite memory of a sport. Whoa.
Okay.
Here it
We gotta
comes.
go from the
Okay.
treasure chest here.
Everyone get ready.
Get it from the treasure chest. Okay, I think my favorite memory from a sport was... Ooh. Oh, you know what it was? Okay, yeah. This was a good one. So we were playing Woodbridge JV. ZZ Chen was in this match too.
Okay.
And the first time we played them, they were quite hard. They were playing very well. They had a couple of very strong players on their JV. And I was with my partner Kareem, who is now at UCLA. And Kareem and I, we were kind of a mismatch, to be perfectly honest, because our styles didn't match up. Kareem was much more kind of a slow player, a lot of lobs, a lot of slices. I like to play the game a little bit faster. I hit 2 first serves usually. I slant. I've started, you know, to hit the ball as hard as I can with you know, varying degrees of success. But for some reason, I remember the score being, you know, fairly close. We were up a little bit, but I felt like this match had a lot of value. So in a weird way, there was a kind of synergy between us. We began to understand each other. We kind of had this mental connection that formed under that immense duress. And during that match, I think we just kind of connected in that match. Every shot would work together. We were playing so well, and we were able to win that match. And I don't think it was because of us, but somehow the floodgates opened, and we had won in the third round 5 matches to 1 match with an overall score of 12-6, which kind of was very inspiring to us. And I think that's my favorite memory from a team sport.
That's amazing. What about you, Sydney?
you know, looking back on this, I think even in the moment, I knew this was going to be one of the most memorable times that I was ever, in a sport. And it was the day of election convention at University High. And
I was there. I was
Yeah.
watching.
He was.
It was the day I was elected girls sports commissioner, and that day we did have one of the biggest matches of our lacrosse season, and it was against our rivals, Woodbridge.
Oh wait, that was
Yes.
the Woodbridge home.
It was an away game at Woodbridge, and it was
Oh,
right after school.
God.
So immediately after my last class, I headed to the locker rooms to get dressed, and then we were all meeting at by the bus area. And I remember getting on the bus with all of my teammates. Everyone was there cheering. It was super chaotic. Totally sorry for the bus driver because we were loud that day.
We're
And
pretty polite guys. Okay, that wasn't even that
On
loud.
the tennis
yeah.
bus, we're
Classy.
Okay.
Kessler makes sure we're classy. We're A1 classy.
This was the one exception for us. We got on the bus. We were, first of all of us were super nervous and super hyped for this game against our rivals. But it was the day I had been elected, and our team captain, Zoe, she congratulated me. And for those of us who know Zoe, she's an amazing person. She's always energetic. She brings the hype to our games. And so we were all loading on the bus, and I remember she was playing, I think, Just a Cloud Away by Pharrell Williams.
Sure.
Yeah, so
I
she
thought you
was-
would say Fireball because that's just what we play all the time.
No, okay, I remember she was playing the song,
Oh.
and yeah, she was like, "This song is for you, Sydney," and like, she was really hyping me up, and I felt all the love and support of my teammates had never been stronger than this point on the bus, because I was super excited for the game. I do remember it ended up being a loss that game, but it was one of my happiest memories
It wasn't
with
a fun
my
game,
teammates.
but it's okay.
Yeah, it was, just for the team bonding, I think that bus ride was amazing, and I will always look back on that day with fond
That's
memories.
so sweet. Slay. That was a really bad high five. There we go. Okay, personally, I know that I asked the question, but I don't really have like a specific really fond memory. I feel like I have a mix of memories. Okay, so I think for me, I did not play this game. I'll preface by saying that, like Arjun did earlier. Our first Beckman game was our first game of the season. We played a bunch of preseason games. Those were fun, like I played in those, but our first Beckman game, Beckman being like, even though Woodbridge is supposed to be like our rivals, Beckman were our actual rivals, and I remember that game, we were returning league champs, like pressure's on, and the game stopped at a tie, 9-9, at and then we played overtime. So the first overtime, no one scored. It was crazy. Everyone was playing incredibly well. But then there was this moment where it was the second overtime. Zoe, our captain, she had a penalty shot. And if you know Zoe, she hates missing her penalty shot. So we were all sitting there and we were like, everyone was on the side, everyone on the field was like on the edge. We were just standing there waiting.
God.
And then... Now I don't want to share the story, guys.
Did she miss?
No!
Oh.
She made it, and
God damn.
every single one of us ran. I know for a second we were like, can we run? And we all ran, because it was sudden death, so whoever scored won. And we all ran on the field to our goalie, and we were like screaming and cheering, and it was our first win of the season. And I think that moment was just incredible, because all of us were just like... The reason I specifically remember it is because Jude, our goalie who was in goal at the time, got like injured in the last second. So then I was like, I took my gear off because I was like, it's 1 minute left in the game. I'm not gonna go play. And then the coach was like, get dressed. She needs someone needs to go in. And I remember like rushing to put all my gear on, and then Zoe scores, and I'm like halfway dressed, and I just like run on the field. So that was really like
That was
amazing.
wow.
And I think just like that sense that all of us cheering, that gave such a wonderful sense and like beautiful show of like how much support you get from your team, just the community you're in. And that's why I want to end on like a positive note, talking about like how much you gain from your sports. And I think from all of our memories that we share, there's a lot to see of what you can get. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
I love
Sydney.
this.
Yes, any final like comments, just to advice to the world?
Yeah, if you're ever interested in any sport, just go for it. I know a lot of people think that it's super scary to try out for a sport, especially one that you've never played. But, just go for it. You'll never know. You never know.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sydney, again, for such a great episode, such a inventive, such a fun episode. I just want to say, thank you guys so much for getting to the end of this episode. I know watching long-form podcasts can be hard, but thank you.
Hey, but wait up. Don't forget. Now, enjoy some behind-the-scenes clips before we move on to talk to a mental health professional more about sports and all that stuff.
What's up, guys? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the behind-the-scenes footage. This is our first in-person episode.
And we have no clue how to set
We have no clue what's happening. Actually, we just found the microphone, and Ryan's setting everything up while we do nothing.
Does anyone have wired headphones on them?
Wired headphone. I'm an AirPod.
Wired. Not wired, my guy.
Oh.
That's our great President Jack. He never shows up to recording sessions except for this one.
Wow.
Jack, you have a few words for the audience?
I have the librarian card.
Hello. Hello. All right. Take one.
How do I turn off? Oh, guys, I have the funny. My mic's about to be really, really bad, but it's okay.
How are you doing that, Brian?
Alright, cool.
Are we recording? Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it
There's a
working?
spike. Alright, cool.
There is a spike.
Alright, start off. Starting. No, I'll say something about the. Alright, 3, 2, 1. So, if our positions change in the last second, that's because I may or may not have put the wrong SD card into the camera, and we may have ran out of storage. But so I'm blaming Andrew, who's sitting right here. This is all Andrew's fault, actually.
Your mother.
My youth's mother is too big.
No, I'm sending it to your mom.
Like his mom.
We're talking about your mother, Mayuk. Don't worry about it.
Welcome back to the second part of the sports episode and sports on mental health. I hope you enjoyed some of the behind the scenes clips from some of the last episodes that we've had. Now we're joined with Dr. Debbie Jason, who is a co-founder and the clinical director at Trauma Therapy and also is a trainer for the UCLA Center of Excellence. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Of course. So before we get started, we just wanted to see if you want to share some of your background and how you got into the mental health field.
Sure. So a little bit about me. I actually just started working in camps and things like that. And over time, I realized I really liked helping people with different sort of social and emotional challenges. Then I ended up working a lot more with trauma and stress over time. So this is now really my specialty area, working with stress and trauma of all different kinds.
What also was your drive to work with children and teenagers, specifically adolescents?
Yeah, at this time I would do work with all ages, but I just gravitate more towards adolescents. I feel like they're smart enough to understand and know how to make the changes, but also really motivated. So I feel like it's a really good opportunity for growth in a lot of different areas.
Thank you. I'll take that into account for myself when it comes to personal growth as well. So going into the sports aspect, and basically it's a huge pressure that a lot of us face at this time. Me wearing my lacrosse shirt right now, totally not planned, but sports being such a huge part of our life does affect our mental health a lot. From what you have seen, how do you see sports take place into the mental health of different patients you've had?
Yeah, so sports, like many other things, are a good thing and a bad thing for mental health. Most people think of exercise as a really good thing for mental health. If you're on a competitive sports team, I actually was captain of my soccer team in high school. So I can really relate because there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. And I think the more serious you are about your sport and the more serious your team is, the more pressure you feel. And on the other hand, it's really good for endorphins, and there's a lot of physiological benefits to being in sports, being on a team, things like that. So it could really go both ways.
Yeah, I agree strongly.
I did have kind of a question though, as you were talking about kind of the positive negative aspects. What do you think is kind of the main challenge, I guess, associated with sports that a lot of athletes do face in kind of the mental health sphere? Because we do hear a lot, especially like by parents, that exercise is very important. I agree, but what do you think is kind of one of the main negatives associated with being in sports, especially competitive sports?
I think especially with competitive sports, there's a lot of pressure in adolescence in general. There's a lot of pressure to succeed, to fit in, to be liked, I guess at all ages, but particularly in adolescence. And I think sports the same really at all ages too, but people are really starting to hone their skill in particular sports. So there's a lot of pressure to succeed if you're on a team sport, to not let down your team. So that can be really challenging at times for people.
How have you seen that affect the actions and the day-to-day of students? Because not only do we do sports, we also have our scholarly lives. And with that, there's usually like a academic and sport balance, or there's just like a family life and sport balance. So how do you see that affect different factors of the student life?
Yeah, that was really well said, because you're right. It's not just the sport and then you don't have to do anything else the rest of the day, right? There's the family, the academic. You also didn't mention the social, but that's a big too, right? You want to hang out with your friends on the weekends, and maybe I have some clients who have football practice 4 times a week and then games on the weekend. So it really doesn't allow room for all of these things in the way that we would like. And my sister always tells me there's only 24 hours in a day, right? And things like sleeping and eating and taking good care of yourself impact your sports capacity. So it's really finding that fine line and that balance in terms of how much you can excel and how much time you can put into each of these things. So it could be really challenging.
Yeah, so I play on the tennis team at University High School, which is, here in Irvine. And a lot of the time, I definitely feel like what I'm taking away is kind of my sleep, and like I prioritize kind of homework and spending time with my family. And how do you think, because we can't balance everything, is there kind of any solutions that you know of that kind of would help alleviate a lot of the stress many people feel from balancing all these kind of tasks?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways. There's a difference between balancing and excelling at everything. And if you kind of cross a line, you get into maybe more of a like anxiety disorder category, where you're so overwhelmed and stressed that you actually can't function, or you freeze up, or you miss commitments, things like that. That would be sort of a more extreme level. On the lower level, it's really about prioritizing, checking in with yourself. I have another client that I used to work with, an adolescent, and he was on, I believe it was some running team, I want to say cross country. And he noticed his time was going down because he wasn't sleeping as well, because he had more homework. And for him, getting good times on his runs was really important. So we really had to figure out, how do you prioritize, switch around your homework schedule. He kind of moved around some social commitments and things like that. But it was really a thoughtful process of getting wise about what goes where and where things can kind of give in order to make things work the best for him.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a really important part or point, that it's different for everyone. I'm pretty sure things that worked for your client would work differently for me and Arjun and things of that sort. But although you said that your clients, they definitely did ask for help. They asked that, hey, they understood that I'm struggling working with improving my time, sleeping, and my social and school lives. But I do believe that a lot of different athletes, especially scholar athletes, believe that they should be able to manage what they're putting at, and they compare themselves to others, or they just assume more of themselves than they are capable of. So how do you think people should handle that, and why do you think that is like present in the schools?
Yeah, well, I think we're kind of skirting around the whole topic of anywhere from pressure to stress to anxiety, whatever you want to call it, as it builds. And I think people who have anxiety sometimes have this impression or this thought of, I have to be perfect. And sometimes in that thought comes the other thought of, I've got to do it all by myself. There's also realistically some cultures that are more, pull up your bootstraps, get it done, things like that. So I think culture plays a piece in this as well. I think even specific family cultures, my family was very like, you don't need therapy, you can figure this out, like just problem solve and start. Which is funny because now I'm a therapist, so things have shifted. But I think there's a lot of contributors. I think people are doing a better job decreasing stigma, but there's still tons of stigma about mental health and a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
So I had another question is kind of a lot of athletes that I know, are so overwhelmed, so stressed, especially kind of in soccer and water polo or sports that kind of have like a lot of practices and a lot of kind of hours spent. And a lot of them don't want to kind of seek out help, right? And how do you think, why aren't a lot of athletes, asking for help? And how do you think we can help our peers, or we can help them and kind of get resources to mental health, even if they are kind of in denial about it?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one. I also have to say, I think especially for teenage males, it's not particularly cool to say, hey, I go to a therapist. I found what works really well is things like informal groups, is people really talking about it. I mean, even in professional athletes now, people are talking about their therapy. If you saw shows from 10 years ago and shows from now, a lot of characters are in therapy. So it's becoming this thing where people go and they get help if they need it. And therapy is not about I'm psychotic and I can't function anymore. Sometimes therapy is about, hey, I just need a little boost. The pressure's a little bit more than I can handle. So I think it's really talking about it. I appreciate that you guys are even opening the conversation, because it's not always this terrible, I'm doomed and crazy type of thing. It's really not anymore.
Yeah. I would like to add on that, because I personally have had that conversation many times with parents. As you were mentioning earlier, it's definitely like a culture thing, where some cultures and some households do believe that, oh, therapy means that you're just not mentally okay. Like something had to have driven you to think that you need therapy. But I think that it should just be normalized in the sense that you should get help when you need it, because everyone has pressures in their life, and it's something that you should deal with. And in addition, I also think that the pressures that athletes get, sometimes it'll just be the competing of other things, but I feel like there's also pressure in the sport. As you mentioned, you were your captain of the soccer team. So as a captain, you definitely must have felt the pressures of having to perform, having to show up every game. And when you weren't showing up, in the case of that, like the cross country runner, it definitely affects you. So how do you suggest you deal with the pressure inside the sport, like always needing to improve, feeling like putting all your self-worth kind of into your sport?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the other things I've worked on with athletes, and I think I even worked on it with myself, kind of not on purpose, not realizing it was a therapy thing at the time, is being present where you are. So when you're on the sport, for me, it was the soccer field, right? When you're on the field, you're on the field, right? That's really what matters, is your team and wherever that ball is and wherever your body's supposed to be, whatever it might be in that case. And when you're off the field, really being able to shift your focus and say, okay, now I'm present in this. And it's actually a learned skill. It's not an easy thing to do, especially if you tend to worry and feel pressure, because your body might be on the sports field, but your brain might be in a million different places. So it's really about being able to kind of practice that skill of being present and moving around. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were asking.
No, that definitely was being present in the moment, because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, because they think about the next game, or they think about, oh, what's my coach going to say after I just did this? For me, I'm a goalie on lacrosse. And so if a ball gets past me, instead of thinking, oh, there's 11 other players on the field, I think, oh my God, my coach is going to kill me. I just let a ball go by me. And so sometimes, even though people don't think that way, you think that way, because you're like, oh, that should have been me. So I think you brought up a really good point. But
And
I
kudos
also,
to you. My worst game ever was when I had to cover for the goalie because
oh,
right, because you're like that last person. I am not a goalie. I'm not good at being a goalie apparently. And I have like a flashbulb memory of that game because it was really, really difficult because I think I let in like 3 goals or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, we need our goalie back. Like I might be captain, but I'm not goalie. So that's good for you. That's a really hard position to play.
thank you. Yeah, I played defense freshman year and then I was like, okay, this is not enough. So I jumped into goalie, but it does come with that pressure. Um, and I wanted to see your opinion on this because I personally believe that when I am dealing with the pressures of like getting mad at myself for mistakes I make, a lot of the times I have to remind myself of the good things I've done or trying to find a positive side. Do you think that it's like helpful to always try to find a positive in a game when you're like trying to battle all the negatives?
I would say yes and no. It depends a little on personality and how you spin the positive. I think what some people say is like, don't worry about it, it's all sunshine and rainbows. And I think sometimes that almost like undermines the fact that like, yeah, it does stink that I let in 3 goals and I let down my team. And it makes sense to feel kind of disappointed about that. On the other hand, going to the extreme of now I'm going to cry for 5 days and not come to school is not very helpful either. So again, it's kind of finding that balance of, yeah, I can be disappointed. I am sad about that. And hey, look at all these other things I did. Look at all my other teammates and how they helped me out, or maybe how they're part of the disappointment. So I think it's kind of having both sides at the same time.
So I did have one kind of question. I don't know if you talked about this. So as you're talking about kind of reframing things in more of a positive way is both helpful, but also can be a little bit detrimental when you don't like kind of acknowledge your feelings about maybe a loss that hurt or something that a mistake you made. How do we help a lot of athletes who struggle with burnout kind of cope with that and prevent athletes from burning out? Because athletics is such an important part, and being fit and having and doing a lot of exercise is very important, but how do we prevent kind of burnout is my other kind of question.
Yeah, well, I think there's excelling and I think then there's kind of overdoing it. And I think when it comes to athletics, it's a very fine line. And again, in terms of what we were talking about before, then you add on academics and family life and all these other things where we really want to show up and be our best. So it really is kind of a fine game of balance. I think it's also about taking breaks. Like even as a therapist, it's not an athletic position by any stretch of the imagination, but we've got to take breaks. You can burn out really in anything that you're doing if you're really committed to it. So, you know, sports have seasons. There's a reason for that. You know, athletes don't play every single day for 365 days a year. That's kind of built into it. So I think that's what I would recommend is sort of plan your next break, balance things out, do some things for yourself, and know that that might mean instead of being 110%, you're going to be 95% as an athlete, but it's better that than 110 and then 0.
So you're kind of like sectioning it out into like thinking, oh, I have to work for this much time, then I have a break. Work for this much time, then I have a break. That's a good way to think of it.
Yeah, something like that, getting yourself kind of in and out of what you need to be doing as opposed to going all in and then being exhausted and then you kind of lose the rest of it.
Yeah. So we focus a lot on like the negative aspects or the ways dealing with the pressure put on you. But I'm a strong believer that sometimes a little bit of pressure is helpful. I think you kind of hit on this a bit earlier, but how have you seen the pressure of like teammates or sports or the pressure you put on self be beneficial to the performance of different athletes?
Yeah, there's actually really great studies on this. And what they found, to make a very complicated study very short, what they found is that there's an optimal level of kind of stress, even stress hormones in the brain. And it's usually between the 40 to 60% mark. So to give an example, let's say for a sports game, if you have absolutely no stress or anxiety about the sports game, you probably won't even show up, right? Who cares? Doesn't matter at all. On the other hand, if you have so much pressure about the sports game that you freeze up and don't remember any of the plays, well, that's a big problem too. So you do want that sort of sweet spot of, I'm stressed, I do feel pressure not to let down. For me, my team was a big part of it, right? But also not to let down myself, maybe my family, wherever the pressure is coming from, my coach, and kind of find that sweet spot that motivates you to do the thing and do your best, but doesn't quite sort of overwhelm you and shut you down. So that's a lot of times things we work on in therapy if people are kind of one extreme or the other.
So as you're talking about kind of these extremes and kind of burnout and pressure in sports, how do you think the kind of pressure you feel from sports change with age? So, like, it's kind of my question, because my dad is pretty competitive into tennis, and like when he takes a loss, like he takes it still very, very hard. How do you think kind of as we grow older, what are kind of the effects of sports? Because in my family, at least, I see kind of the effects still like of losses and kind of the pressure my dad feels as when he's playing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's very individual. So for example, somebody who was really, really stressed as a kid and couldn't handle loss and might cry if they lost even like Candyland as a very young kid can kind of grow up and just build on that. So now every time they lose, it's this extreme thing. On the other hand, and again, this kind of comes back to being a proponent for, it doesn't even have to be therapy, but some sort of support system where it's like, I can take a loss, I can move forward, I can be mindful for my next match. So it kind of depends how you shift your thinking about it over time and your athletic capacity over time. Maybe you have less losses if you get a heck of a lot better. Maybe you have more losses if you get a terrible injury, God forbid. So I think it depends more on the person than the age itself.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a very minute example of this, but freshman year, I was not as like into lacrosse, or I didn't have as much experience. So when I like lost a game, I was kind of like, okay, I guess I lost a game. But now that my skills have gotten a lot better, I play a different position and like I'm on varsity, it's just like it matters a lot more. And I'm glad to see that my competitiveness, because when I was younger, I was competitive with the game Life of Pi. I don't know if you guys, Game Life, just Life. I don't know if you guys ever played that board game, but that's what I was competitive with. So I see that like a lot of the time changes things, but I do want to say that many times in the moment, we get really upset with ourselves. And that affects everything else we do. And you did say staying in the moment, but sometimes it carries on to our academics, that carries on to our sleep schedules. Do you see it affects the other factors of your students' lives? Like one thing starts going downhill and then like everything else just kind of follows with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're talking about the mindfulness thing, kind of separating out being present here versus being present. Yeah. You're also talking a little bit about self-judgment. And that's another big thing where it helps to have an objective party saying, are you judging yourself a little too harshly? Like, is that really as bad as you're saying it is? We tend to be our own worst critics. Again, in sports, to some capacity, that helps you, makes you get better at what you're doing because you notice what you did wrong. When it, again, goes kind of a little bit too far across that curve, that's when it becomes this all-encompassing, like, well, maybe I'm not good at anything and now I can't stop thinking about it. And if, you can be thinking for 5 weeks about a missed shot if you let yourself do it. So it's absolutely something that can kind of haunt people if they stick with a judgment and don't really check in with somebody else about how accurate or inaccurate it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did have kind of a more like a broad question, like based on kind of sport, like kind of different between team and individual sports. So as an athlete in kind of individualized sports versus team sports, how have you seen kind of the effects of pressure? I feel like in tennis, for example, especially singles, you feel the pressure is a lot more palpable rather than a team sport. But I can also see team sports being more stressful because you're also letting down, you could feel like you're letting down, 10 or 11 people. So is there kind of a difference, do you think, between the kind of pressure in a sport that's kind of individual or team based?
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm wondering if there's real research on this. I'll just talk from my personal sort of clinical experience, which is I think in individual sports, from what I've seen, again, I was more of a team sport person. Individual sports, what I've seen is they end up comparing themselves a lot to other players, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like that player's time was better than me. That player got farther along in the sets than me, or whatever it might be. Again, you might speak more to it as a tennis player.
Sure.
So that's the comparative pressure a little bit more. As a team, it actually helps you diffuse that. Like, hey, it wasn't just me. Maybe it was my 11 teammates. Otherwise, we would have won if it was 12 of me, you know? So
Yeah.
you can kind of say different things to yourself. So I think there's definitely pros and cons, because you might not be letting down your team, although usually people still come with some sort of team-like thing, even in individual sports.
Yeah.
But the comparisons are a little bit different. The pressures are a little bit different. But either way, I think it can get to that point where it's either like, forget it, I don't care, or it's so overwhelming that I'm frozen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're both different and still have their own pros and cons in their own way. And okay, so I kind of want to say this in the way that Arjun and I both, we've been AP students for all of high school. I guess that's one way to put it. But we definitely like to be as competitive in our academic life as we are in our athletic life. And I wanted to see, well, not only if there's a correlation between people that are more competitive in sports and like competitive in academics, but is there more of a mental like health struggle for people that are competitive in both places, or is there like a balance between?
Yeah, I don't think that's uncommon. I mean, I've certainly seen people who are like, I don't care about school and I'm only doing school so I can stay on the sports team. But I think it's actually more common for people to say, hey, I want to excel across the board. It's almost like a personality trait to say, hey, it's important. And again, there's cultural and family factors. There's actually a lot of factors that play into that. But I think that's more common than not, that people are working really hard across different areas of their life. So I think that's something you definitely see a lot. And then there was a second question there that I don't remember now.
Oh, no, it was just, I was wondering if you mentioned that there was a correlation, but I was just saying I was wondering if it's worse for AP students in like the pressure mindset, or it is.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. Again, I think there's a fine line between, so let me put it this way. So someone who's an AP student and working really hard on a sports team is much more susceptible to something like an anxiety disorder. Doesn't mean everyone on a sports team has an anxiety disorder, but it does mean you're going to be more stressed. You're putting a lot on your plate. You're expecting a lot from yourself. So it's really easy to fall quickly into those judgments of, I'm not good enough, I should have done better, things like that. So I think it's more susceptible to it, or maybe you're more anxious in the first place. That's why you're pressuring yourself to do all those things. But you can kind of just go in and out of that, right? Like one week you're really anxious and stressed, and the next week you're like, I got this. So yeah. I think it goes more towards that, but there's not millions, there's probably hundreds of variations of mental health disorders. So.
Yeah, that does kind of make sense. And do you think,
Well, okay, I wanted to just share something about that, because I definitely think that you were mentioning anxiety and pressure and all of these kind of things, especially stress and anxiety, definitely affect athletes and scholars in a specific way. And as you were mentioning, sometimes you just have it beforehand, and it just increases by that. I've seen in teammates and myself that many times, because of our sports and our academic curriculum, we seem to get more stressed, and that leads to being more anxious. And I was just wondering if you have any like final tips kind of thing of how to deal with everything being thrown at us, and how to take a deep breath and calm down.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I try to individualize more, but I'll give some sort of generic ones, especially for athletes. I think there's a lot of body-based regulation things that people can do. I have a lot of people literally go on their phone and put in YouTube muscle relaxation or mindfulness, just something to kind of bring your body down, maybe after a sport or right before a big test or something like that. Everyone kind of knows deep breathing. Most people do it wrong, that your exhale needs to be longer than your inhale. That's a secret that a lot
Wait,
of
really?
people don't know. Yeah. So if your inhale is longer than your exhale, you're actually sort of activating the wrong system in your body. So there's these little tips and tricks along the way. And then we talked about some of them, right? Which is sort of staying present, checking your judgments, ideally with a therapist or a friend or somebody else you can trust. You even have to catch your judgments first. You can believe them for a long time before you even realize what you've done to yourself. So there's a lot of things that can be done, and different things work for different people. So it's kind of a bit of trial and error too.
Yeah, and definitely to seek therapy whenever you can, and get the help you need. You are a great example of all the help you can get if you do go to seek therapy. But I want to see if you have any final pieces of advice or final things to say to all the sports and scholars out there.
Yeah, I think we've been talking a little bit about being tough on yourself. So I think there's also room for self-compassion. Maybe that's something that was missed a little in this conversation of we're all, even if we need to do better sometimes, we're all doing the best we can. And the pressure is also a helpful thing. So I guess I just want to end on that piece.
Yeah, I support daily affirmations. I don't know. I've been trying that out, so hopefully it works.
Yeah. Well, let us know. Maybe you'll put on the next episode or something.
Yeah, I'll keep you over there. I'll update everyone next episode. And on that note, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. I'm so grateful to hear all the insightful advice and knowledge you had to share with us today. And to all the listeners out there, thank you for listening to this episode about sports and the effects on mental health. And I hope you join us in the next episode of the Laugh Out Together show.
Hey guys, thanks you guys for watching this episode of the Laugh Out Together show. Be sure to check out our other episodes if you haven't already, and we'll see you guys next time.